formidable robots.
If you were a kid in the late 2000s to early 2010s, chances are you may have grown up with unrestricted internet access like I did. One thing kids on the internet loved to do at that time was hang out in virtual worlds. Mostly Club Penguin, though there were many other popular virtual worlds, like Moshi Monsters, Animal Jam, Toontown Online, Littlest Pet Shop Online, Panthu, Binweevils, UB Funkies, etc. There were some more obscure virtual worlds that did not enjoy the same success as Club Penguin, yet still had their own followings, such as Chobots, Planet Kazmo, and Tootsville. Most of those games are long gone now. A lot of them lasted 5 years at most, while the more popular ones, like Toontown Online, Club Penguin and Moshi Monsters, got to last at least a decade before they kicked the bucket. A lot of people who were passionate about those games went on to recreate those games as private servers so they could continue playing them, even if it meant having to start their progress over again. The biggest example of this is Toontown Rearden. However, there is one obscure defunct virtual world that does not have a fan-made private server. There is a good reason why. NovaVerse was an MMORPG similar to Club Penguin, intended for all ages but mainly targeted towards children ages 5 to 14. It was run by a company known as Sweet Mist Interactive. It ran from 2007 to 2017, and it had a following despite its obscurity. The game was very weird to say the very least. Even if it were to target 5 to 14-year-old kids, a lot of what the game showed was anything but appropriate to that demographic. Implications of abuse, death, and even discrimination against those not like the player base. There had always been rumors about who truly owned NovaVerse or what NovaVerse's purpose for existing was. NovaVerse, despite all of that, had a following consisting of tons of kids, teenagers, and some adults too. It had its own cliques as well, such as the average players, the preps, the role players, the online daters, the attention seekers, the trolls, the kids who would try to circumvent the chat filter like you are a beach fork you and shy it to be cool, the weirdos attempting to do inappropriate stuff in the game, the baby bees, and the kids who were like, my dad is a moderator and he will ban you. NovaVerse's art style was kind of chibi-like to say the least. Think of Noonbury and the Super 7's art style, but in 2D and a little different looking. Something like that. The story would be about how the users, the species of your avatar, once coexisted with the monos, the game's antagonists, in peace. However, the monos would soon want more power. Their leader, Dr. Monosphere, would then want to conquer NovaVerse and enslave the users. The monos looked like the users, but they were all grayscale, had red eyes and a permanent cartoonishly evil expression. The game had a mission system similar to Animal Jam's adventures, and most would involve encounters with monos, which you had to defeat. Some of the missions involved boss battles as well. You would have to contact the CDS, Chrono Defense Syndicate, a spy organization similar to the PSA EPF from Club Penguin and the Super Moshis from Moshi Monsters, to gain the ability to do missions. Seems innocent, right? Throughout its 10-year run, there were some instances of NovaVerse players disappearing, with a significant amount of them never being heard from again. The earliest recorded NovaVerse disappearance happened during beta testing in 2006, before the game officially opened its doors to the public. The disappearance of this playtester was quickly forgotten about before beta testing ended, and no one brought it up again until after the game shut down. Though this may have been the most successful cover-up that Sweet Mist Interactive had done to that point. In 2008, a rumor about killer monos was spread. Those rumors claimed that sometimes, a mono would randomly show up and chase after the nearest player. If they caught the player they were chasing, a pop-up would show up with your IP address in it. OK was the only option. A loud beep would play and the screen would go black, deleting your account permanently. It would imply your avatar had died. Some who spread those rumors even claimed that before the deletion of their accounts, an unpleasant picture would show up. The picture allegedly depicted their avatar being hanged before the black screen came. Some claimed the killer monos were controlled by moderators, rogue Sweet Mist employees, an employee of Zwinky and/or other rivaling sites, or hackers. Alleged screenshots of those started surfacing online. The staff of NovaVerse declared those rumors to be false, and the players who shared those screenshots received disciplinary action, such as temporary account suspension, or in some more severe cases, depending on how graphic the screenshots were, a permanent IP ban by the staff for creating inappropriate NovaVerse content in Photoshop and sharing it around to create a scandal. Since there are no videos of the killer monos in action, there is no evidence to back this rumor up, other than anecdotes from former NovaVerse players. Therefore, the NovaVerse community accepted that the rumor was false. However, to this day, some former NovaVerse players try to insist that the killer mono rumors were real. Some angry parents had their children cease playing the game anyway when the controversy died down. Another rumor was spread in 2010. It had to do with one of the rooms in the game known as Mono Park. Mono Park was devoid of the game's usual upbeat vibrant color scheme and atmosphere. It was a flat area of gray grass with some black-gray bushes, a foggy gray sky, and some dead trees. It was accompanied by an eerie pessimistic tune, in the same vein as the three themes of Boss Bot HQ from Toontown, as the background music. Some players reported finding a hidden area in Mono Park that would leave them with headaches. Some logged out of the game terrified. Some wouldn't sleep for days after accessing the hidden area. One player reportedly self-harmed after discovering that area, and some even claimed a player committed suicide. The latter was proven false after said player logged into her account a few weeks later, claiming that her absence was because her parents wanted to keep her from getting addicted to the game. The hidden area was very much real, though not important enough to cover up. It could be found if you performed a certain glitch in Mono Park. Only a minority of players got to visit that area, as the glitch required to enter it was very unlikely to work. I don't remember what the glitch was or how to perform it. The music was the same as Mono Park, except it was lower pitched and distorted. If you listened closely, you could hear a faint sound that sounded like crying. Real, recorded crying. There was some faint static noise as well. Some claim the music also contained a sound that only dogs could hear, as some players said they didn't have headphones plugged in when they discovered the hidden area, and that their dogs would start barking and growling constantly as if there was a threat in the house until they left the hidden area of Mono Park. The room was a hill with what appeared to be burned grass, and the same sky from Mono Park. On the top of the hill was a large tree that also appeared to be burned. But the thing that disturbed players the most was this. There were tons of player sprites and mono sprites scattered around, all glitched and abstracted. Some players who discovered this area wondered if the glitched player sprites were players who deleted their accounts or were permanently banned. This theory would have credence, however, as a hacker would find out that the coding of this room had notes attached to the glitched sprites, which stated the day the player sprites first logged in and the day their account got deleted or banned. Many players who discovered this hidden area also reported seeing the avatar of a banned player in the corner of the screen every 10 minutes. The player sprite would only show up for 3 to 5 seconds every time those 10 minutes passed, and the sprite would appear to have an angry, pained or anguished expression every time. In 2013, there was another controversy concerning a NovaVerse moderator known as Crimson723. Sweet Mist claimed Crimson723 retired on her own accord, though a lot of people who claimed to know Crimson in real life had said that Crimson had disappeared too. What raised this concern was the fact that Crimson723 did not respond to anyone attempting to communicate with her off-site, which was considered strange, as she was usually active on social media. Sweet Mist denied having anything to do with her disappearance, claiming she was living a normal happy life. Around 2015 to 2016, NovaVerse updates became slower and less frequent. Then the game would stop getting updates completely in June of 2016. This led players to worry that Sweet Mist Interactive had abandoned the game. In 2014, hackers began to appear. Soon enough, they would play NovaVerse. It started with the first tier. The hackers would use a code to get around the chat filter. They abused this exploit. It initially started as the hackers using this to merely annoy the players by making raunchy jokes about sex, spamming ASCII versions of the troll face, jokingly telling players to do drugs, etc. However, the things they'd say would become more extreme. they would start using the chat exploit to tell players to commit suicide and or outright make references to Nazism, communism, terrorism, pornography, etc. Imagine all of this happening on Roblox servers right now. It would later escalate to the second tier. The hackers started using spam bots to slow down the game, tricking users into giving them their passwords, causing servers to go down, and getting other players banned. Some more experienced hackers got to hack into the game's code. This would bring the third tier. The third tier was even worse. Those hackers would download viruses to players' computers. They would also add something that would make the browser open a new tab by itself. Those new tabs would direct to either a scam site, a porn site, a screamer, or even a shock site. One user even said they ended up getting a virus that was so bad they had to do a hard reset on their computer. There is a rumor claiming that these hackers reportedly bricked an administrator's computer too. A patch would later be added to prevent third-tier hacking from ever happening again. However, the only thing Sweet Mist Interactive did about the lower tiers of hacking was to ban those hackers, not aware that those hackers could come back and make new accounts. For the last 3 years of its lifespan, NovaVerse had devolved into a cesspool of hacking. Many players quit as a result. Shortly before the game's closure was announced, a data miner looked into the game's source code and found out the game was still running on an outdated version of the engine it was built on, which had caused the game's security to deteriorate as a result. Even some regular users began to engage in similar behavior without hacking, such as banding up with other players so they could make their avatars form a swastika together for annoying other players, using furniture in their in-game homes to spell out vulgar words, forming crude depictions of penises, etc., and then asking other users to come to their homes after that just to shock them. During the last 2 years of NovaVerse, those antics had become common. On March 31, 2017, players finally heard from Sweet Mist Interactive for the first time in 2 years. But the news that Sweet Mist would put out was nothing close to good news. NovaVerse was going to shut down in May of the same year. The reason given was the cost of upkeep for the servers becoming too much for the company to pay for, but those within the know or working for Sweet Mist Interactive at the time knew the true reason. Sweet Mist Interactive was being actively investigated by the FBI, which had resulted from the 2013 disappearance of Crimson 723. Her body was discovered around late summer to early fall of 2015, in a borderline unidentifiable state, and after 2 years, she was identified by forensics. She died in 2013 at the age of 26, having been shot in the back of the head in an abandoned building, her body being dumped in a river afterward. Connecting this to how Sweet Mist covered her death up, many Sweet Mist employees were arrested. But it was only the beginning, as many deaths in the Yonkers area were starting to be traced back to not only Sweet Mist Interactive but also the United Temple of Eridanus, the cult behind Sweet Mist Interactive. Control of the game was left to an undercover FBI agent, who was moonlighting as a NovaVerse admin, as well as a former member of the United Temple of Eridanus who had defected and become an informant. He decided to keep it up for 2 more months, leaving enough time for former players to say goodbye, as he knew some players made friends and good memories playing the game. However, what he didn't know was that Sweet Mist had programmed the entire world of NovaVerse to take on a darker apocalyptic appearance if it were to shut down. The United Temple of Eridanus had used this as a last resort to indoctrinate players into their cult, claiming the apocalyptic appearance was Armageddon. The last 2 months of NovaVerse's lifespan, for lack of a better word, was chaotic. Many players who hadn't played in a long time came back to the game upon hearing about its closure, to help give it a final send-off. However, all players who logged into the game the day the closure was announced had been unexpectedly met with something different. The login screen's background image had changed from the cute colorful picture of users that it had for years, to what appeared to be a blue gradient. If you scrolled up, you could not only see the surface of the water, what the blue gradient turned out to be, but you'd also see a rowboat, with a player sprite, appearing to be floating on the surface, edited to appear dead and bloodied. The blood looked like crudely drawn red scribbles smudged around in GIMP. Above the body and rowboat was text saying, "Goodbye on May 29th. If you logged in, you were immediately taken to a lowly populated server." You still started in the plaza room like normal, but since you were in an almost empty server, little to nobody was there. The only things keeping you company would be 6 idle player sprites standing in front of the buildings, edited to look injured, beaten and bleeding, and heavily bandaged as well. The buildings were either burning, dilapidated, or boarded up. Sweet Mist Interactive always intended to make the ending of NovaVerse's lifespan appear to be apocalyptic, as every other room took on an apocalyptic appearance the moment the closure was announced as well. You were still allowed to change servers so you wouldn't have to experience this alone. All of the hackers' antics had disappeared without a trace, as the informant running the site had hired some people to help fix the game's security. To make sure no one would indirectly be sending money to the cult by paying for the game again, the informant made it so memberships couldn't be purchased again, gave every player a free membership, and cancelled all recurring paid memberships. There was no official last day of operation for NovaVerse. Some argue it was on May 29th, but it has not been confirmed. This was due to the fact that on May 29th, a majority of users tried to log into NovaVerse to give it one last farewell, but were ultimately greeted with a seizure notice from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The minority of players who weren't met with that were able to log in. The last day of NovaVerse would cause shit to hit the fan. According to the minority of players who were able to log in during the game's final moments, they all gathered in the plaza, and multiple people were spamming the crying emoticon. Shortly before the servers were permanently disconnected, a loud, audibly revolting squealing static sound blasted from your speakers, even if you had headphones plugged in. The game would then freeze for approximately 30 seconds. After those 30 seconds were over, the game would stop freezing. A dialog box came up, saying the following: "Your adventures with NovaVerse have come to an end, thanks for playing," with only "OK" as an option. Some players claimed that before that ear-shatteringly loud sound played, they got a certain cutscene. Due to the United Temple's beliefs, the ending cutscene was the world's color slowly fading with every passing second. Then Dr. Monosphere showed up with a horde of monos, trampling the players, seemingly to death, while what sounded like eerily distorted static played over the explicit carnage. After the carnage was over, a deep robotic text-to-speech voice spoke out.
"There is no point in resisting. Armageddon will come for you all the same. Join and you shall gain eternal salvation. Refuse, and you shall die horribly."
As far as we know, there is no surviving proof of this cutscene, but from what was described in the cutscenes, it's probably for the best that this ending cutscene never resurfaces, as the effects this had on the players who saw this were damaging. Some players began exhibiting concerning behavior in real life. Some began scratching their skin to the point they'd bleed. Some began acting disgustingly saccharine. Some had started having recurring nightmares. Those who had nightmares described their nightmare as the same thing. Those nightmares were described as them being in a black void, and then big white all caps text saying "Game Over" would appear. However, after a few seconds, the text would glitch into gibberish and then turn red, and then their NovaVerse avatar would appear, staring at them without an expression. Then after a few more seconds, their avatar's expression would change to a more somber-looking one, and then a speech bubble would appear over their avatar, saying something along the lines of, "Your lack of faith has killed me, you could have saved us, now it's too late, the end is near." After that, their avatar would disappear, and then the void would suddenly start flashing into grotesque graphic pictures of dead bodies. The fates of the players who had started acting in a concerning manner after viewing that alleged cutscene depended. Some had stopped acting like this within 3 to 14 days. However, sometimes they would take longer to overcome it, or they had no sign of coming out of this behavior. One was sent to a psych ward. In the worst cases, some went missing. 4 of the players who went missing were found, but they were not found alive. Those 4 people who were found dead after going missing were all youths between the ages of 10 to 16, killed similarly to the body found in 2015. 3 of the 4 victims were not United States citizens. The first identified victim was Fireblade, real name Devin Zhang, a 16-year-old boy who had played NovaVerse since the 2006 beta tests. He was last seen alive in Austin, Texas, being kidnapped by a man in gray. It is believed the man took him on a road trip to New York, where he was killed. The second victim, I Love Phantasialand, real name Leonard Kriesel, aged 12, was from Germany. He was kidnapped by a member of the United Temple's European branch while waiting for a bus to take him home from school, tortured by members of the cult's European branch, flown to New York, and then tortured by the cult again before being killed. The third victim, Pink Poppy 236, real name Serena Noor, was a NovaVerse player from Singapore who went missing shortly after the game shut down. She was around 13 to 14 years old and was on vacation with her family in New York. A man dressed in all gray kidnapped her in a car and slit her throat near the Hudson River. Her remains were also found in an unrecognizable state and weren't identified until 2021. The fourth victim, Mr. Cool Guy 79, real name Deshaun Campbell, was a 10-year-old Canadian boy. He and his twin brother Jabbery, also a former player of NovaVerse, were both kidnapped in Vancouver by a man dressed in all gray and then flown to New York. Deshaun's body was beaten beyond recognition and wasn't identified until 2023. Jabbery was found alive in 2022, but he had no memory of the life he had before he was kidnapped. It isn't known what the cult's motivation was for killing those 4 kids. It may have been one final act of retaliation to commence Armageddon. It may have been at random. What is known is that the timing of the murders was very suspicious, as they happened not long after NovaVerse shut down, and the 4 known victims were all players of NovaVerse. The body of the beta tester who disappeared in 2006 was also found. Any programmers and employees associated with either NovaVerse or Sweet Mist Interactive had been blacklisted from the industry due to their suspected ties with the United Temple of Eridanus. Even though many of the programmers behind the game were as much in the dark as the general public was, it didn't matter. Many of these programmers have been forced to retire due to being blacklisted, but many more have been driven to suicide, especially those that were innocent of the horrific acts that the cult had partaken in and were left with no options for a job, all because they had unknowingly worked for a cult. Because there had been players who went missing after the games shut down and never heard from again, many speculate that those missing players may have also been killed by the cult and their bodies were unrecoverable. There are also theories that those people haven't died but instead were sold into black markets or human trafficking rings. However, there is nothing to back either of those up. There is also a theory that they were forced to join the cult, with the missing players living outside of the US being tracked down by the cult and trafficked to New York, and adopt new identities when they joined to make it harder for the authorities and detectives to track them down. Due to the dark reason behind NovaVerse's existence and its history marred by controversy, along with how shady Sweet Mist was, which all contributed to the negative reputation NovaVerse had by its shutdown, very few former NovaVerse players thought of starting a NovaVerse Rewind or any other revivals. NovaVerse's dark history, along with the covered-up deaths related to it and the fact it was linked to a cult, had tainted NovaVerse as a whole for its former players, including those who were nostalgic for it. There were 2 attempts to start a NovaVerse revival. Both had failed. Both attempts were concurrent with each other in terms of development. The first one, named NovaVerse Rewind, was taken down by not only the current right shoulder of NovaVerse but also both the Yonkers and New York police departments. The second one, named PlayNovaOnline.net, fell through before the game could be released due to infighting within the development team over the ethics of publicly releasing the game. One PlayNovaOnline.net admin went missing after its cancellation, and many have speculated that an Eridanusian had kidnapped said admin and forced them to join the cult. On top of this rumor, there are also claims that the cult had tortured this admin after kidnapping them. Is there a need to create private servers of NovaVerse anyway? The game has been tainted by the crimes it was linked to. Maybe it'd be as cursed as the original, but who knows? Some things are better off left in the past, and NovaVerse is one of them.